Can people hear me? Good. Now I know you can hear me. We are going to start, so if people can get any of their coffee, you'll have libations later, so you can get coffee or tea now and take your seats. And the sooner you take your seats, the sooner you can have libations, apparently. So, my name is Chris Holland. I'm the Chief Conservation Officer at the National Aquarium, and it's a pleasure to be here to moderate this session on, it's the case study, taking the deep dive on public-private partnerships and really focusing on aquaculture. So, thank you. And I will say that I have spent most of my career, as I think all of you have, working in partnerships. I have worked for 50C6s, which are trade associations. I've worked for 50C3s, nonprofit NGOs. I have worked for the quasi-public-private National Academy of Sciences and for for-profit contractor, and actually for the National Aquarium, which is a 501c3, but it is a very consumer-facing brand. And one of the things, besides focusing obviously on context and content, the type of organization, as we all know, that you work for dictates how flexible you are in partnerships, how risk-averse you are in partnerships, how easy it is to accept or give money in partnerships. So I think that sometimes these are the basics, but they can be the things that really trip up a partnership and the ability to form one and execute. So I just put that out there because we heard at the last panel that some great recommendations at a 30,000-foot level. We're going to take a deeper dive. As I said, through the lens of aquaculture, we're going to get down in the dirt and really find out, spread the windows back and see how is the partnership working. This is a partnership that is between a research academic university and a for-profit production seafood producer, so for aquaculture, and I will have them introduce themselves in a minute. And I think that this is particularly timely for aquaculture. As we all know, we have a burgeoning population. We need to have a sustainable form of protein. We know our wild fishery stocks are depleting, and that the only way to solve this issue is going to be through farmed-based, responsible aquaculture. So that this is, and I think with industry, with any industry, but with particularly this industry, we need the leadership is going to come, from my perspective, from the industry. So we're going to have to, if they choose to accept the mantle of leadership, they're the ones that are going to have it. And we have to, in the NGO community and in the academic community and in the government, learn how to partner with industry, and industry, vice versa, has to learn how to partner with us. So with that, I will say that I'm going to start out by having Dr. Kelly Lucas, who is the director of the Thad Cochran Marine Aquaculture Center, and Chris Manley, who is the director of the Persiformis Group. They're going to give us about a 5 to 10 minute collective overview, 10-minute collective overview of the facts of this partnership. Why did they form it? What are their roles and responsibilities? What are they hoping to achieve? And then I'm going to ask them a few questions, again, keeping with sort of the foundation basics of how it is working, how it's been constructed. And then I'm going to open it up for you to really talk and ask them even more questions about aquaculture and how this partnership is moving them forward and a lot of other issues as well. So with that, which one of you would like to go first to sort of outline what exactly is this case study and why did you do it?
Sure.
And why are we sitting here on this table? Why are we here? So let's let's start with that.
So yeah, I'm Chris Manley. I'm director of the Persiformis Group, and just to give you a brief history of what we're all about. So we're a vertically integrated company. We have multitude of other companies that I'll kind of list off. I don't want to go too much into detail on that, but it's good to have a background of kind of what we're all about. So starting off, we have one of the companies is Global Blue Technologies in Cameron, and that is in Taft, Texas, and that is one of the largest recirculating aquaculture shrimp farms. It's located in Texas, recently visited by Hurricane Harvey. So dealing with that, but we're rebuilding from that. We have Sea Products Development, which is our shrimp broodstock and also post-larvae sales. We have Prometheus, which is newer, and that is looking at the genetic advancement of marine finfish and shrimp for domestication of the species. We have Mari Signum, and what that is we have a method that can extract chitin out of shrimp shells in an environmentally sustainable manner. So we have that going for us. We have Sustainable Sea Products Development, and that is our sales and marketing firm. We also have our own aquaculture supply company. And then we have me, and that's Persiform's group. So our principals wanted to diversify from shrimp into finfish. So what we did is we started off with research and development, because marine finfish, aquaculture, and commercial scale and land-based recirculating systems, there's not too much out there. So we had to figure out how to grow them, how many to put in a tank, how to make it profitable. So that's what we're really all about. And one thing that is our core values of our company is a triple bottom line mentality. And that is social responsibility, treating everybody, our partners, our employees, the golden rule, how you want to be treated. And more importantly to me is environmental sustainability. Everything that we do, we will do it in the most environmentally sustainable manner as we can. But you can do those things, but nobody's going to listen to you if you don't make money. So obviously we have to be economic prosperity as well. So one thing and what brings us back to this topic is we all know the current state of the oceans. We all know that aquaculture will hopefully be the future to feed the world and also save our oceans. But that's a huge, huge endeavor to do. So we cannot do it alone. Industry can't do it alone. Universities can't do it alone. Government agencies can't do it alone. It's a huge endeavor, and we all need to work together. And that's something that my group of companies definitely believe in. We don't have an ego. We don't want to sit here and plant a flag saying we're the first ones to do this. We don't want that. All we care about is making aquaculture profitable and beneficial to our planet. So that's the whole goal of what we're doing. So kind of go over, knowing that, to go over with our relationship with Southern Miss, is our principals wanted to look into a marine finfish species that's native from the southeastern U.S. throughout the Gulf. Not very known in the commercial market, but it's a very great tasting fish called triple tail. I actually did my graduate work at University of Southern Miss Gulf Coast Research Lab, so I already know that they did some research on it. So based on their timeline, or based on their research, I knew that they would be an ideal partner for that. So, right now we're in a 5-year partnership with USM, looking at commercial techniques for hatchery production, as well as genetic improvement and domestication of the species. While what we're doing is, not only funding, but we're also assisting them, and I'm actually going down there next week to help build the broodstock system, but also assist in the grow-out research at our R&D facility down in Texas. So we have that in the works that we're going to get a lot of in-depth about today, but also I have a lot of other partnerships or potential partnerships that we're looking at, whether it's other universities and developing other marine finfish, or looking at ways to treat our effluent so we can even be as more sustainable as we possibly can. So.
Excellent. Kelly?
Great,
Your
thanks.
side? He said, she said?
Yeah. So, like Chris said, I'm going to give you a little bit of the background so you can know where we're coming from and who we are. So, the Thad Cochran Marine Aquaculture Center, like you said, is part of the University of Southern Mississippi, and we're located in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, in the Gulf Islands National Seashore. Great hidden gem down there for those of you who get a chance to come visit. We have 100,000 square feet of space spread out over 11 buildings dedicated to recirculating aquaculture systems. And so we do have an intake that comes off a local waterway. The salinity is very variable and the water quality is variable, so we rarely collect water. We do it a couple of times a year. The vast majority of our work is made through artificial seawater. So we make our own seawater using different marine salt mixes. This allows for a lot of different elements, mainly to be very biosecure. By creating this water ourselves, we recirculate the water. You can filter it mechanically, filter it biologically, you can sterilize it, and you continue to reuse it. We don't want to lose any water out of the system. That is money that trickles down the drain. So we are trying to find ways to keep that. But it also allows us to work on a multitude of species because we do have this biosecure element. What our main goal is we're trying to reduce the bottlenecks that constrain marine aquaculture. So we are focusing on those things that when industry gets to this thing, it's just a bottleneck, it's too slow, or it's not working. That's what we want to target. We want to reduce those bottlenecks to help marine aquaculture be successful. A lot of our primary research at the center has focused on larval culture, or your early hatchery techniques. We focus on genetics, a lot of genomics work in the domestication and selecting of species. And we do a lot of disease work and aquatic health management work. That's been some of our primary focus at the center. We are funded through the state, through federal grants and state grants, through some hard money from the state, as well as through private business and different partnerships. So rather than get into a bunch of species, since we're gonna talk about triple tail, and I looked earlier because I thought, oh, we have a glamour shot. That's a triple tail. For those of you who don't know what a triple tail looks like, there's a glamour shot on the screen. So more importantly than diving into some of those species is why I feel that the partnerships are very important and very important for aquaculture. I read a statistic the other day, especially for marine aquaculture. We've looked at like 10% of the species. We've explored 10% of the species. I mean, we didn't say we perfected them. We said we've explored 10%. That is a lot of leftover that we haven't looked at. And we need to focus. If we're going to get these products to market fast and we're going to help provide the protein that is necessary for this growing population, we got to focus, and we need industry to help us focus. We need for somebody like Chris's company, and Chris, who's already done the research and picked a product and said, we think we can do this, we think we can market this in the end, and we think that, if we do it, we can do it together and we can get it there. That's great for us. But that just provided us focus, and we can work to solve this problem. So that's a lot of the reasons we think these partnerships are going to help move us forward and get the products to the market to feed the growing population. A little different. I came back to the university in December of 2016. So I met Chris for the first time at an Aquaculture America meeting in San Antonio last year. But Chris knew the university and he knew the players. And so he already had a partnership with USM, and he and I have, since met and worked on it. And he's quick. He said, this is what I want to do. Can y'all get me something? Academics can sometimes be slow. We lit a fire under the lead PI. And he got Chris some information shortly after that meeting. And by May, the lead PI, Eric Sayant, and Chase Casper from our Office of Research Administration, who's a VP of Technology Transfer, were on their way to Texas to meet with Chris and Percy Formies and start that, understand what is it you're about. Tell us about your company. Show us your company. Let's start developing that, relationship, that two-way street, because that relationship is very, very critical. And the other thing, from my perspective as a director, I was unable to attend because I was out of town, so it's a little sad there, but there was a lot of communication. From my perspective, our Office of Research Administration was critical. They do these partnerships a lot, and so they were very versed in all the different mechanisms. So when they actually sat down with Chris and talked about what are your goals, what are the desires, what are the things you need to see, they could start running through all the different mechanisms that we as a university have, and they could pick which mechanism was going to be the best avenue to take. And so I really, from a research perspective, having the Office of Research Administration that can do that was critical to making sure that we were moving as fast as we could, and we're as nimble and as flexible as we could.
So both of you have already touched on three themes that we have heard throughout the day of so the culture of time, that industry can move very quickly and not all other partners do. So reconciling that together and training, it sounds like you talked with your staff about, we need to move quickly here. We need to, expedite our processes in order to meet our partners' needs. That you really talked up front about relationships and spending the time building relationships. I understand from reading one of your articles that you guys even did a holiday party together. Yes, right, okay. And that you really explored your goals up front. And so that everybody understood, and that seems to always be one of the keys. But I'm going to continue on that theme because we're in the early stage of this partnership of what was actually your contract vehicle? Was it an MOA? Was it MOU? Was it an actual contract? How did you actually, and who initiated the relationship? I mean, you met a year ago, but who actually then initiated the relationship? And when you developed your vehicle, what would you have wished that you would have included that you didn't, or that you would do differently next time? Or is there anything? Maybe you've got it perfect this time.
Yeah. So, I'm a biologist, okay? I shamefully admit I did not know what an MOU was about a year ago. So, but no, it's a research agreement. That's what it's titled as.
Okay.
Everything's laid out to publication rights, to exclusive rights, to IP, all that stuff is all
Okay.
laid out, the funding and how all that gets transferred over. So that was all. And, like the theme is, as of today, is communication and getting everything that you want out of the project for both parties on that. And for the most part, it's on that piece of paper. So it's all there and everybody knows about it. In terms of how who approached you and how it was going, like I said, the principals wanted to do triple tail. And I was like, well, there's only one group that I knew that looked at doing triple tail in the university, and I was fortunate enough to go to that school for graduate school. So I knew Southern Miss did it. And then also by happenstance, the Aquaculture America for the World Aquaculture Society meeting was in San Antonio, which is a 2-hour drive from our facility. I already know Eric Sayant, he was one of my professors in grad school. Reg Blaylock was on my committee. So shot him an email to go, hey, I want to meet. And then we met at that meeting, and then this is what we want, this is what we're looking for. And then 2 months later, they're visiting Texas.
So your trust was already built somewhat
Yes,
because you had those
yeah,
relationships, and the message points you used with your company was essentially, these are the people that are the
Exactly.
experts that can help us. And Kelly, on your side, were there any, sounds like you have several partnerships, do you have criteria for partnerships? Was there any issue of brand alignment, that you look at or anything along those lines?
Well, I think in any partnership, you're looking to see that your vision or your mission, there's something that you share that's the same. I think the last panel even said the same thing. You don't want some adversarial, or you don't want to be. It's not a shotgun marriage here. You want your goals to align. And so a large part of that was having Chris explain what it is his company was trying to do and what their goals are. And yes, they align with the university's goals. And so that's great. And from a university standpoint, I worked for the state of Mississippi prior to coming back to the University of Southern Mississippi, and in trying to work with private business from the state's perspective, there was always it was not only just slow. You spent more trying to figure out what the mechanism could possibly be than actually getting it done. So coming back to a university where they have plenty of tools that they can use. It's kind of like, what is the desired outcome? What do you need? And let's make sure we have a tool that can fit those needs. And in this case, it was a little different than some of the other ones. It wasn't necessarily directly contracting with our division. We went through our University Research Foundation because there were some aspects of the partnership that would have been a better avenue going through our Research Foundation, which is a 501(c)(3) who has a partnership with the university. And so the research agreement in this case is Percy forms with the university's Research Foundation. And then, of course, the Research Foundation works with us as a university.
So having the creativity to recognize it may not have to be directly contracted with you, but it could be the research foundation, and having somebody that understands, and that's where I guess I kind of started out with, understands the different mechanisms that apply for different organizations, can save you a lot of time in the end, because I think all of us have been stopped by not being able to get you have two program officers that want to transfer money and want to do the work, and they can't manage to do it. And everybody, I think, has had an experience along those lines. I can say from the National Aquarium, being a more consumer-facing brand, we recently started a partnership with on consumer aquaculture, consumer education campaign with Wegmans. And because we're a consumer-facing brand, we really looked at the brand issue of Wegmans was a brand that we felt aligned very much with our brand. And so that was something that was taken into consideration of who do you partner with. So that's why, hence my question. I could ask them questions all day, but I think you've probably got a good sense of the foundation. If you have questions, I'm going to continue, but if you have questions, the rules still apply of coming up to the microphone, saying your name, and then asking a question. And this is really about how do we scale and grow aquaculture, but any partnership and any lessons learned that we have, so that obviously I have something to say at the next session, which is always important to me. No, I'm kidding. But while we're, so please do come up, but while we're waiting, another question I had for you is on the research then, who, in part of your agreement, who owns the research? And, and any intellectual property, and, how does that play out? And how is it going to be open sourced then for anybody, or how is this going to play between the two companies, two entities?
So yeah, obviously we're putting money, we're funding the program, so we needed something out of it to justify the money. So what we have right now is, written up in the deal, is we have exclusive rights that comes out of the IP created of the project for 10 years. In return to that, USM gets a small royalty from it. However, with that said, it's not like we don't want to, we know, believe me, I know, that publication is key, and sharing of information. One thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to stifle competition within aquaculture, because aquaculture needs competition. More people need to grow fish, and we realize that. So we are definitely open to publication and everything on that end. How that kind of works in our partnership is if USM wants to publish anything, they send it to us for review. And I can say, I can't say for everybody, but in my end of pushing publications through, it's going to go through. That's one thing I don't want to limit. I don't want to limit any of our universities to not be able to publish, not be able to go to conferences and present and anything like that.
Yeah, so the main thing is they're reviewing it to remove any confidential information from their company that is confidential to their company that they don't want published.
Okay. And is there, and that deals with the publication, and is there any, do you have an exclusive contract in the sense of, are you allowed to work with competitors of Perseformis?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
in terms of we probably wouldn't work with them on the same species or whatever, but yeah, we work with different species and stuff.
Okay. Any questions from them from the audience so far? I'm thinking particularly about how to scale.
Well, I did want to touch on one thing he said when he talked about research and being able to publish, and that's always key. And this speaks to something that Pam mentioned earlier, is in the university, what gets you tenure and what gets you the accolades is publications. So publications is key, and that's what you're focused on. You're focused on publications. Universities don't seem to treat IP and other things like that the same way. And I think when Pam spoke about putting IP and putting that information on par with research publications and stuff is how you get researchers interested in doing this work with private businesses, as well as seeking out some of the private businesses. They go to conferences and stuff where there are plenty of private businesses, and they don't necessarily seek it out because it's not something they're trained to do, not something they often get credit for. And so if we can find a way on the academic side to make sure that we put those type of relationships on par, whether it's IP or that type of work, I think that you would see a lot more partnerships, Also, the training is key. I know recently our research administration announced they were going to do a whole training on working with industry and how you work with industry and what the mechanisms are and what the flexibilities are. And I've understood that coming from where I am to working with academics. We have plenty of businesses that come through, and I will sometimes have an academic say the strangest thing that just doesn't necessarily apply, because in their mind they're thinking of a grant or something. And so making sure that they're trained in how to work with industry, and that industry is different, and that we have a bunch of different mechanisms we can use to help meet both of our goals.
Right, right.
Hello, I'm Daniel Wolf at NOAA, Canals Fellow at NOAA Office of Aquaculture. My question was, I guess in general, in broad terms, what do you think are the biggest problems facing aquaculture in this country these days, and how can partnerships like yours help solve those problems?
So that's a good question. I mean, a lot of the aquaculture that's coming out, especially land-based systems and land-based commercial, it's new. So you can go to these, you can go to the states and go, hey, we want to do this. And it's kind of like, okay, well, we need to know. And you're trying to say all the technology you're doing, and they don't know if it's proven or not or anything like that, because it's not, it's so new. So, you know, permitting's always a thing. If you ask anybody in aquaculture what is holding it back, permitting's one. You know, there's some strides being made recently that's kind of hopefully to overcome that. But yeah, I mean, that's, and then another thing is market. Is the current market of the U.S. seafood market. For example, sablefish, one of the fish that we're looking at growing, I mean, the current market for that is a 4 to 6 kilo fish. It's a huge. For me to grow a fish like that in a recirculating system, it's going to take me 2 to 3 years. But I can grow a 700-gram fish in 7 months, 8 months. And that fish has lower FCRs, so less feed that you're feeding it, and less energy being produced, so it's a more sustainable product. But the market's not ready to see a 700-gram sablefish, even though it'll be a perfect plate presentation. So I think it's a combination of those two things.
Kelly. Sushi, you're right. That sounds good. Sounds delicious. I think some of the things that you have to help reduce the barriers to entry for those who are participating in aquaculture, and permitting is key. And making sure that all the agencies that need to be coordinating on this permitting are coordinating, and that you are able to move it through in a quick manner, as quick as possible in the federal government sense. But if you have one coordinating agency and they're kind of the lead, and you're working with all these agencies, you want one person to talk to as a business, and you want that person to be able to ping whatever other person in whatever agency they need to ping to get you through the permitting system, because your permits are going to come from, you know, the alphabet soup in the government. It's not just one entity, and it won't be one entity because they all have legal requirements they have to meet. But you need that kind of one face that gets you through it. The other thing is, if we would have treated aquaculture the way we treated agriculture in terms of the funding mechanisms for it and the support for it, as far as the multitude of public support that would go into it and the extension, you would see aquaculture grow at a lot faster pace.
And the last thing I'll just add to it is that also changing consumer perceptions. So that's actually where the aquarium has been focusing, and a lot of others as well. That's what our partnership with Wegmans is about. And with a private sector seafood producers in the partnership as well, is to really look at if we educate people on, know your fish, know your farm, know the techniques, here's answers to common myths. Will that change, your ability to buy farmed fish and your willingness to buy farmed fish? So that's where we're focused right now. And I'll just say anecdotally that one store manager told us something very positive the other day. He said, every time I point to the collateral, which this just started a couple weeks ago, and talk, 9 times out of 10, the customers bought the farmed fish. Now we'll see how it goes in a couple of months, but it's an interesting, public-private partnership as well. That's so that would be my focus on it. Another question I had for you is, really, have you hit any snags so far in the relationship?
No, I mean,
Or is it, it's everything's wonderful?
so to kind of keep going with this relationship theme, we're in the honeymoon part of the relationship. So right now everything's great, everything's perfect. So, no, I mean everything's been good so far. There's been no snags, but I think the main reason isn't just because it's new. It's we're very open. We communicate a lot with each other. For example, Southern sends us monthly updates on, hey, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. And it's not like we try to be as much hands-off as possible, but if Southern needs our assistance to go down there and build a system or to collect broodstock, which is the fun part, we definitely go down there and help. So it's really communication's the key that keeps it going.
And I assume you
That's
agree.
exactly what I was going to say. As with any relationship you have, it's always communication. And anybody who walks into my office to ask me something about Triple Tail or something that they want to change or do, my first thing is, have you talked with Chris? So they are aware that I want the same communication from them to Chris as well as we have with Chris.
So there's been no, Chris, we need to talk. There's been nothing like that yet, no.
Not yet, knock on
No.
wood.
Well, that's good. We have a question, yes.
Okay, Megan Davis from FAU Harbor Branch. So I definitely applaud your partnership coming together, and also at Harbor Branch we do a number of public-private partnerships in our aquaculture development park. So one of the questions I have for both of you is, one of the ways to expand aquaculture is to have a large amount of seed stock available to be able to expand the industry. And that's one of the things that we're very much suffering from in the United States. So my question to you is, as you start to develop the business model that you have, will you then be able to make seed stock available and start to actually grow farms and let others know the knowledge so that, because there's lots of room, that I don't feel like we're at the point of competition actually, I feel we're at the point of growth.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's absolutely correct. So one thing that we're trying to do, whether it's on our shrimp side of things or also our fish, is we're not happy to do one farm. We're not happy to do one entity. What we really want to do is we want to, make an impact, and we want to, change the way, not only business is done, but also aquaculture is done. So, as you say, for a sablefish example, so we did the R&D on sablefish. It was successful. Now we're moving to California, Northern California, to do commercial production. But also with that is going to be a hatchery as well. For example, this first hatchery we're looking at will hopefully produce about 500,000 juveniles a year. We only need 250,000 for our grow-out facility. So we're going to have some extra that we would most certainly do. Our genetics work with our Prometheus company, that's going to look at, doing genetically domesticated, not genetically modified, genetically domesticated fish that will benefit hatcheries as they start going up and so when they start doing this. We envision our model to go on that we can, either finance or go joint venture in multiple grow-out facilities. And we would have the hatcheries or the broodstock or something that we would have that we could send out our seed stock to other locations. So we're not just happy building one sablefish farm, but we're also not just happy doing one species as well. So yes, hopefully, if all goes well, we'll reach that point.
And of course, you and I have talked about this, and I know Harbor Branch has been involved in it. It's the university does the research on the hatchery techniques, and we get it to a point where we then want it out. We want to move on to the next thing. And so that's really our goal, is to get this out into commercial ventures that can then continue to supply the commercial market. Mm-hmm. We as a university don't want to be in the supply market. We're happy to be in the supply market in the beginning when the industry's new, but our goal is to get it out to commercial industry and then move on to the next.
Excellent.
Hi, Ruth Perry from Shell. I really like the examples because of everything I've heard today. It doesn't matter what our respective organizations are doing. There's a lot of commonalities between these public-private partnerships. So I've heard a lot of it, right? And maybe it's the marriage analogy, and that's brought out some of that there's consistency and commonalities. So I think it's really advantageous that we can extract some of this from the day, right? Because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And again, it doesn't matter, you know, just listening. I know Kelly from her former life as well, but you know, we've dealt with this in the Gulf of Mexico. It doesn't matter what you're doing or your individual interests. It's a lot of the same. We're doing the same. And I actually think it's really good to get these different partnerships around the table and these different entities, because the academic side that you brought up, it is really interesting, because it was the same thing that we experienced. And one of our partnerships is actually with USM and the Navy. And from what the academics hear, from what the military hears, from what, you know, private industry hears, it's all different. So that communication is really key. But I think this whole marriage thing, and it's funny because just give it a few years, right? You'll get out of the honeymoon phase, you know, and either you'll get a call, we need to talk, you know. So, you know, you're sitting there thinking, like, what could they possibly ask me? You know, it's like, well, we want to, what is it, a multiple of 5, you know, we want to go from 4 gliders to 20, you know, next month kind of thing, right? So sometimes it's good and sometimes it's a bad once you get out of the honeymoon phase. But just joking aside, I think the opportunity to get together and figure out what some of these commonalities are, and also what some of the hurdles are, right? Because a lot of us are in different phases of these partnerships. So what do you expect over time? And so what are some of those learnings that you can get from some of the more mature partnerships that you don't hit those roadblocks when they come up? So I see some really good points out of this, and I just appreciate the story, because I think it kind of reaffirmed from the day that there's not a lot of reinventing the wheel around the power of partnerships. So really kind of getting that to a granular level for new people, but also expanding beyond the ones we've had and getting some of these other examples in. And getting people around the table who've done this and who are different times of their marriage would be really good to push some of these. So thank you, and it's a great story. We are looking at aquaculture from idle iron perspective in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's another thing, you know. So learning from these opportunities and translating that to moving offshore. You know, when you have structures available, are they useful? So a lot of things that you can do jointly that you may have never thought of, right, from different partners. So thanks.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and I think that was the point of, you're exactly right, of the COL. And it's also true that we actually do know how to do partnerships, and it really takes somebody in each entity that has done them before and knows how to say, you're working with industry, move faster, or, you know, use this agreement, or whatever it may be. And so that's a key point too. And another question I had for you was, what about philanthropy? Is there a role for philanthropic dollars to come into partnerships such as these? I mean, we see a lot of times research in aquaculture being funded by philanthropy at times. How would that work in a relationship as this, or is it better to be directly, I guess this is more of a, well, it's actually for both of you, you know, what role can it play in then moving the aquaculture industry forward in particular? And then how would that affect your partnership or partnerships in the future?
I have, and this is coming from the state perspective when I work for our Department of Marine Resources in the state. Actually, several ENGOs have recently, or, you know, in the past several years, have become proponents of aquaculture and using aquaculture. And so partnering with them, they're still working, you know, sometimes on their board members or whatever, in terms of different things they can do in aquaculture, because they see the benefits. For shellfish aquaculture, we've worked with a couple. And so I do think there's a place for these type of opportunities. And even from the state's perspective, we at the university partner with the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources for our state conservation species. Our state conservation species is spotted sea trout. It's the #1 recreational fish, fin fish in the Gulf of Mexico. And so we do stock enhancement. And we work with Coast Conservation Association. They actually help catch our broodstock for us. And so they do several live catch tournaments a year that help with our broodstock collection, keep us going, because we actually keep different watershed systems of those broodstock, and we return those fish to the same water bodies based on the genetics. So we've partnered with them, and they do a lot of work with us for that. What we get out from it on the commercial side is we've used that species to work with a lot of different larval culture techniques that we can then transfer over to the commercial industry as well. So it's a win-win for the commercial as well as the restoration side of things and conservation agencies.
And
So-
I guess the follow-up before you is, and maybe you were going to say this, is how do you make sure that what you're researching is actually going to be then feasible at the commercial sector? Or did I steal your
No.
thunder on that?
No, no, and that's a great point. But one thing in terms of our company is all our money that we bring in is private investments. It's friends of friends, friends of family raises. We actually, going back to from our shrimp farm to now, we have over $100 million worth of investment, and that's all private investment. That's no banks. That's nothing, anything like that. So these aren't the Carnegies of the world giving the money, but it's, farmers in Iowa that see the aquaculture model just how the hog model was, and so it's not as philanthropy on that end, but it's still private investment in terms of that end.
Okay. Interesting. And we'll get back to my question about the research. I want to.
Hi, I'm Janan Evans-Weilant. I'm a Sea Grant Fellow in the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. And we recently had an aquaculture hearing, which was really great, and Dr. Lucas testified. And one of the things that I've heard you guys mention a little bit that I'd like to open up a little bit more is, the role of sort of that public perception side and some of the outreach work that is probably still needed to do with U.S. aquaculture. And how do you see partnerships like this or other future work that can sort of engage communities or the public and sort of changing the story around aquaculture and what work might be done there, and whether that's something that your organizations can be involved with, or whether other organizations like Sea Grant and Extension, like you mentioned, might be able to help with?
Yeah, so public perception of aquaculture is definitely big and definitely needs to be addressed. But doing a partnership like this, it helps because no university is going to go into a partnership with an entity that's going to do something that will harm the environment or anything like that. So by having this project, it already gives us a little bit, a leg up, saying, okay, well, if USM wants to work with them, we need to work with them, or the public will be like, oh, they have a university, backing them. Okay, so they're all right. So, but there's certainly other, like Sea Grant and the Best Choice Seafood Program, stuff like that, that is definitely changing the way the public perception of aquaculture is. It's no longer, you say aquaculture, it's like you're cursing at somebody. So hopefully, that's definitely changing. So that's definitely a good thing.
Yeah, I think social license is going to be critical moving forward, getting buy-in from the public to do aquaculture, but it's also changing the vision of what people see. And I've noticed this a lot, even from the hearing and when we walked around. When you say aquaculture, people's minds go to different things. And if you say, what did you just see? When I said aquaculture, because I'm watching your eyes, and they immediately picture like farms and mangroves, or something that they've seen on the web, and not indicative of how we do aquaculture in the United States.
Right.
And so that is going to be critical to get them to see what we're talking about when we talk about aquaculture. And whether that's offshore, whether that's land-based, in recirculating systems or ponds, is the new technology that is out there to do aquaculture. The other thing is around the health of seafood, and getting that information out there, and knowing that the domestic production of seafood in the United States, given that our environmental laws and our regulations, is a far healthier choice than some of the choices they're making today that they don't even know that they're making, because they're just unaware of that level of information. And so it's with anything, knowledge is power, right? So the more information people have, the more information consumers have, the better choices they can make, and the more progress we can make to supply people with safe, local, sustainable seafood.
Right. And making it personal, as you said.
Yeah, thanks. So a year ago, we had our public policy forum was on the ocean and food security, and we talked. That's where we sort of opened up the conversation on aquaculture a bit. Several of you were here, and we had some great talks and presentations about the complex sort of the federal part. If you want to grow the aquaculture, you've got to get beyond. And you guys have you got a state public and sort of a private in this wonderful little marriage in a small town, and it's awesome, and we all love you. Now, I'm not going to say we want to turn this into the bachelor program or something like that, but it's fraught with failure, as we all know. But if we take this larger and do the type of aquaculture and mariculture and offshore and finfish, we learned that this regulatory permitting structure between different states, and Washington State wants to ban all aquaculture because of problems. Alaska says never shall you have finfish aquaculture. You can do shellfish. And we have all these complicated, then you get to the federal level, and the permitting for offshores was shown last year. It's convoluted. You merge that with state across some imaginary line of water. And then you bring in all this regulatory environment. Yet if I wanted to start a business and get permitting, it's really hard. I look at other nations, and I've got I've got tax incentives. Yeah. I've got a lot of other means by which, stipends and everything else to start an aquaculture business. So this is the long story. I see this still as an environment where we have to grow the number of marriages or this whole environment. And I think we all understand safe, sustainable aquaculture is good for fisheries. It's good for the country. It's good for economy. Are you seeing any progress? I know there's been an aquaculture bill. There have been hearings. Great question on that. Are we moving the ball down the field, or are we still sort of stuck in a muddy field up there in Hattiesburg, and it's a cold, muddy day, and the guys can't even run the ball more about 5 yards, to use a local example, Mississippi there. So anyway.
I think we are seeing some progress, and I think you may, I'm not getting ahead of anybody, sometime in the near future see the legislation that Senator Wicker has been working on for aquaculture, at least for offshore aquaculture permitting, as well as the research dollars. I think you may see that real near in the future. And I think the hearings were timely in getting that information addressed. And I know that shortly after the hearings, the Commerce Committee went and met and started discussing some of the things that were mentioned specifically in that hearing and how they can make sure they tackle that in that legislation. And the key in that legislation, what they're trying to do, at least for offshore, is the permitting. They're trying to establish a way to get these things permitted, to get offshore aquaculture permitted. All aquaculture will benefit in this bill. There's research dollars, research dedicated to it helping us advance aquaculture, and that advances all aquaculture. That's the diversification for land-based, whether it's pond culture or whether it's offshore. It's really helping to make those advancements. And I know in my part of the hearing, I really mentioned the public-private partnerships element, because I also think that is really critical to moving forward. I mean, we want to know that what we're working on is going to benefit somebody so that they can get a product to market faster. And so I think you have to have industry at the table for that.
Excellent. Chris, did you want to comment on that?
I mean, so we're land-based, and all our farms and everything will be land-based systems. So we don't have to worry about moving into federal waters, which is a good thing. But we still, like, for example, right now we are trying to put up this farm in Northern California, and no disrespect to California, I fully agree with their permitting process, but it's difficult. It's definitely a challenge, but it's something that I think it's necessary to go through those steps and make sure that what we're doing is not going to harm the surrounding environment and anything like that. So we don't really have to worry about that, but I know there is becoming progress for permitting to go offshore.
Excellent. Rich, did you have a question, or we'll go over to Mike?
Following up on John's, which was 90% of my question. That
Oh,
was
okay.
good. But the at the hearing, which I thought was just excellent, the Senate Commerce Committee hearing, you didn't need any convincing after that aquaculture is great. I mean, for all kinds of, social, economic, ecological reasons. It's just there's no question about it. The barriers are still there. And one of them, to be frank, and I'm really glad to hear Kelly talk about partnerships with ENGOs. There is some reservations in the NGO community and other parts of it about going forward with this, and they remain there. My own view is that they're a little bit dated, that a lot has happened in the last decade, and commercial as well. And I'm glad to hear you talk about partnerships with where you have the commercial sector involved there. But what can we put together in terms of partnerships that is going to give people confidence that this is going to be ecologically sound, which is a major, major big one, that we're addressing social problems, and just give that sort of confidence. And you are a start, at the state level, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, and one thing that, too, was kind of brought up in the earlier sessions is you don't want to start off too big.
Right.
You don't want to go and start, conquering the federal government in terms of this type of thing. So starting in the in the state level and stuff like that is a step forward. But to change the public perception is, we're not secretive of what we're doing. There's been a couple articles published on our partnership that's been out there in the public that kind of can see, okay, this public-private partnership is not only interested in producing more fish, but to produce fish in an ecological sound manner. So that definitely helps, and things like that will definitely push it forward.
And having full transparency in the partnerships.
Yes.
And transparency then to the consumer is also absolutely, and that's a key part of the partnerships as well, as you've talked about with communication, but transparency to the other stakeholders.
Absolutely.
And so, Mike, speaking of the federal government.
So I'm Michael Rubino. I'm the director of NOAA's aquaculture program. Most of my comments are about partnerships, but in answer to John's question, the administration and NOAA are working hard on these questions of regulatory streamlining, perhaps putting together some kind of an aquaculture seafood competitiveness initiative to address these questions. Very much following up on last year's public policy forum that you hosted, John, so thank you for that. On the partnership side, you've got Chris, private sector, Kelly, university. Chris, you talked about the philanthropy side of things. Government is another part of a partnership equation in terms of, and the tools that we have for government are under what's called the Cooperative Research and Development Act Agreement. We can also do them through materials transfer agreements, through and a variety of other types of agreements. Most federal agencies have got a partnerships office. They're very good at putting together these kinds of contracts. Our program in aquaculture at NOAA has been kind of a guinea pig for aquaculture, or I should say for NOAA, in terms of doing these Cooperative Research and Development Act Agreements, or CRADAs, as the acronym goes by. For example, our Milford lab in Connecticut has developed probiotic algae products for the shellfish industry. A lab in North Carolina developed aquaculture technologies for red porgy and then transferred that to a company that was going to grow them in recirculating systems. In Alaska, in Kodiak, our lab is effectively acting as a hatchery for the state of Alaska for kelp farming under a CRADA until the private sector is ready to have their own hatchery. Chris's sablefish originally came from our Northwest Science Center's Manchester laboratory. And then we've got the whole array of grant programs that Kelly's well aware of to work on. What I'd like to see personally coming out of this, and this is perhaps something that could come out of the bill that Senator Wicker is drafting, rather than doing sort of annual grant programs where you've got this call for proposals and you've got 1 or 2 year money, is what aquaculture I think needs is sort of the Cooperative Research Institute approach of things, where you've got partnerships with federal government, private sector, universities. There is a federal government element to it, but you're leveraging that federal money through an institute and through a partnership. Maybe you competitively bid that on a regional basis every 5 years. So from a university perspective or private sector perspective, you don't have to be writing grants every year, and you can actually get some work done. That's something I would like to see in this legislation.
And I think I spoke, at least at the hearing, a little bit on long-term funding for certain things. I mean, we're talking about a 5-year partnership, and if we're doing it in 5 years because we know we weren't going to get an answer in 1 year. When you're looking at genetics and selective breeding and this domestication of breeding, it was going to take multiple years to do it. And at year 5, we have to evaluate, do we think we're making progress? It may take 10 years to get the product, but you got to get there in steps. And you're absolutely right. 1 year, 2 year funding where you can't predict the next funding cycle isn't going to get you what you need in the end. You're going to have some of these long-term, funding sources in order to move the needle to where it needs to be.
Yeah, and to kind of go over how a partnership with a government organization can occur, in this site in California, we're actually looking at land that's owned by the Humboldt Bay Harbor District. And they have a pulp mill out there that has been out of business for quite some time that they're trying to make it into an aquaculture park. So that will be another partnership between us and with the Harbor District as well to utilize that site.
That's excellent. And kind of, Mike, an example could be the University Transportation Centers, the UTIs that go through the transportation bill. It's something somewhat similar. One last question, and then we'll have takeaways from our panel.
Brian Taylor, Hawaii again. Disease and feed. Are both of you dealing with that issue? One of you, either of you, neither of you? And where are we at? Educate me as a little bit out of date in this area. I mean, it's because I more deal with offshore than onshore, so help.
Disease in the feed or like disease and feed? You're
Disease
separating.
and feed.
Okay.
Two of the big issues.
He was saying, two big issues,
Two
two
big
broad
issues.
issues.
And you have like 2 minutes to
Yeah.
to
So
fully address that.
I will say that that's one of our focuses at the University of Southern Mississippi. We have done a lot of work with disease and aquatic health related work, and so they generally tackle disease on a by what the disease is basis and breaking it down. But yes, they are making advancements into disease related work and feed and nutrition work. I know one of our projects is a Sea Grant funded project with another industry member, Reed Mariculture, is looking at copepod technology. That's a constraint, a bottleneck in the marine finfish industry. There's a certain time of a lot of marine finfish stage life cycles where their mouths are really tiny and they'll only eat this copepod, which is a crustacean. And so the ability to grow enough copepods to feed your marine fish is critical. And so for industry to advance, they need this product. So another situation in feeds where we're trying to reduce a constraint that helps the industry grow.
Yeah, and real quick, and I can explain more at the reception or something like that too. But in terms of disease, for a shrimp side of things, disease is an issue. And in our genetic company, we're looking at, obviously you can get SPF, specific pathogen free, but you can also incorporate resistance of diseases. In terms of our finfish, they're going to be on land-based biosecure recirculating system. So as long as you're biosecure within your facility, you don't have to worry about it. In terms of feed, that's definitely an issue, and alternative proteins is certainly going to be. Right now, it's not on our radar because we're trying to do a lot of things, but eventually it will be.
Excellent. All right, in just a 1 or 2 word answer, what is your key takeaway recommendation for this group on your partnership, the number one success point? And you can't both say the same thing.
Communication.
I knew she was going to say that.
Communication is the key to any relationship and any partnership, and so that is my one takeaway.
Okay?
Well, apparently it's like a relationship, so treat it as such.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. This was very informative.